Hello, and welcome to this CUBE conversation as we dive deep into this very special AWS Pi Day celebration. For background, for those who don't understand this and the significance, March 14th, 2006 was the original Pi Day when AWS launched what it called storage for the internet. 20 years later, S3 holds over 500 trillion objects, serves more than a quadrillion requests per year, powers over 1 million data lakes, and underpins AI workloads all over the place. Today, we're unpacking how a service started as cloud storage has become foundational infrastructure for the internet and now for the AI era. To help me unpack this all, I am so excited to be joined by Andy Warfield, who's the VP and Distinguished Engineer from AWS. Welcome on board, Andy.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
I mean, I always love talking to you. I mean, we've gotten to talk for a number of years, and you just bring a lot of involvement and enlightenment onto why things have happened with AWS. So why don't we kind of start there and say, start with the beginning of S3 and Pi Day, and why did AWS decide to build S3 back in 2006? Who was the customer AWS was working backwards from, and what internal problem at Amazon really dictated to go down this path?
It's a great question. I should be clear up front that I wasn't here at the time that S3 launched. And so I'm drawing on the experience of the team on this one a little bit. I was still, at that point, I think finishing up grad school. It's crazy that it's 20 years ago, working on Zen, which Amazon ended up using on the cloud side as well. And then moving into a role where I was an S3 customer, building on top of like very early S3 for some projects that we worked on. And so like talking to the team and like looking back on a lot of the early S3 like docs and the original PR, like you say, there was an intention that it'd be storage for the internet. I think the thing that I've learned over the years talking to the team about the origin story is that internally Amazon had a lot of teams that were building, internet-facing applications, and they were running into a problem that I think a lot of enterprises, to a certain degree, even today, run into around teams having to stand up their own enterprise storage. And so they were finding that they were creating a lot of islands of storage. They were finding that there was a lot of like repeated, undifferentiated management of that stuff, and that at the end of the day, the storage that they were building on top of wasn't the best fit for the types of like web-facing applications that at the time Amazon was really pioneering with. And so S3 was born out of both a really significant internal need around, having an elastic, scalable, like web-facing storage service, but also the observation that like what was good for Amazon was probably something that was really valuable for a lot of external builders.
Yeah, and I think also one of the big factors, I mean, I remember back then I was still actually on the IT side myself back then, and building out data centers, and we were looking at S3, and one of the things that I remarked was, again, the 11 nines of reliability and durability, and that was one of the main factors, which, as a person who owned disaster recovery and understanding that and business continuity for a financial services company in the North America, that was a big thing that we were looking at when we started to look and broaden our expectations of what storage and its storage layer could be. But that was a great thing.
For sure. And the thing that you're saying is really interesting in that I was in the same space for a bunch of my career, like working on the enterprise side and thinking about disaster recovery strategies. You were always like, figuring out where the colo for your second site would be. And like, whether it was like ISDNs or T1s or what kind of like network link you needed to provision to get onto that, and talking about like SLOs and SLAs and like RPOs and stuff for having that sort of redundant copy of your data. And a really fascinating thing about the way that S3 quickly evolved was into building as a regional service, right? As like a storage system that was built on top of the AWS like 3 availability zone primitive, and actually rethinking storage from the perspective of having like 3 physically distinct sites with separate infrastructure, like physical separation, power, and all of those things, and actually being able to achieve a level of durability and availability that other storage systems up until that time had really never been able to even design for.
Yeah, it would seem that, again, it was kind of, when I spent a little time at AWS and everything, and it was really, like you said, the underpinning of a lot of things, plus having built, been a partner of AWS's and built on top of S3 with SaaS delivered products and all of the things. I mean, now you've been there for a bit now, and, again, the whole idea of any developer, any amount of data, any time, that seems to be still kind of that direction that AWS has gone in, is, from the initial intent to where it is now. What really, again, has helped drive that forward? Because I don't know that, the original folks thought S3 would become what it is today, to put it mildly, which is amazing platform for that matter.
I don't know. Like, I think that it would be a fun thing, and maybe we should do it sometime to try and like walk through the eras of learning and sort of like the team's mindset over S3, because I think there have definitely been some like discrete, transitions on how the teams looked at stuff. But I think you're totally right that the observation was very early on that presenting up object APIs and building for really like the experience of unlimited scale and unlimited throughput, and like just like removing limits as a source of things that add friction and slow you down as an enterprise or as a developer, really like defined certainly the first half of S3's existence, like singularly that thing of like learning as a team how to operate that way and how to respond to, events on anything that happened. Like, I think it's often said in storage all up that, to build any storage system, like a file system or like a SAN or block store or anything, it's about like 10 years of maturity to just get the system to a point that it's like really, really trustworthy operationally. And with this one, you've got like a thing that's not being shipped as shrink wrap software or as something that's like run by the customer. It's a service, but the team really needed to like build and establish that maturity. And I think looking back, that first 10 years for sure was around like learning how to scale, learning how to build new regions, learning how to like have like metrics and alerting and stuff to really like stay in a great posture for scale and performance and operations. And I think like I joined, I've been on the S3 team for almost 9 years now. So really the second half of S3. And I think that it was an interesting moment that from the time that I joined, we had an incredible foundation to talk about, and the team still focuses ruthlessly on those fundamentals. And so in my early days on the team, I did a lot of work on performance. We really started to like grow our story and performance to talk about taking advantage of the width of the S3 front end and being able to build really, really high throughput oriented storage applications by working across the entire web server fleet. We really, over that same period of time, angled into other sharp edges that customers and builders had on top of S3. So a really, really significant one is consistency, right? For the first, 10 or so years, S3 was eventually consistent, which was a design decision that let us like move fast as a team and scale, but left customers and builders having to like, make decisions to like deal with in their applications. And when we did that launch of object level consistency for S3, suddenly the system became much easier to build on top of. And there's this benchmark that comes up in a lot of our conversations where customers tell us that we did a thing, and it allowed them to delete code, right? It allowed them to make their software simpler. And that's like such a rewarding thing for us. And I think it's a thing that the team measures ourselves against. And so I think you have like this long period of just being ruthlessly focused on refining that original like product without really even like changing its boundaries too much.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that even that one, because having been involved over that era when it went from eventually consistent to having consistency, I think that was key to a lot, because that allowed people to not have to do things in, like you said, in their own software. And I think, the storage services that are on S3 have grown over the years. I mean, being able to be, like you said, it's already, multi-AZ, but how do you then bring it region to region, and how do you do other things with global clustering and things of that nature that also, to your point, unlocked a lot of different, activities for customers that they could now build their software in a different way. And I know we're going that direction because, it's much more than, a storage system at this point. When did it become apparent, for you and for the team, that it was just so much more than just object storage?
I think it's a great question. I think that we've had signal and a lot of like evidence of customers like building much more. So first of all, like to the thing that you're saying, the just object storage thing, to me, at the time that I like first started working with object storage and then moved on to work actually on the S3 team, object storage was very much an archival primitive, right? It was a thing that you could like actually turn on in your backup system or as a target to stick cold data. There were object front ends for tape libraries and stuff. And I think a thing that was remarkable to us was, one example was the move of, at the time, a lot of Apache Hadoop through the S3A connector to run on top of S3 directly instead of on top of HDFS, right? So you had these like early companies doing like data lake style analytics, and they were building these big JBOD like disk racks inside their enterprise data centers and running HDFS on it to be able to do, large scale like log analytics or warehousing type things. And with the launch of the S3A connector, suddenly they could run those same Hadoop jobs on top of VMware or on EC2 instances in Amazon, and just use S3 as a backend for it. And I think that was like one of the cases, it's probably not the first one, where we started to see the data in S3 starting to become effectively primary data, right? Effectively like first-class application data. And through, those early years, certainly a lot of my first years here, it was like the realization that suddenly performance was a factor because people had latency needs off of the data. You were seeing examples of, startups and other companies doing media streaming directly through S3, like sending live feeds into S3, running transcode, and with a timeliness requirement, like getting that out to broadcast. And suddenly, there was this moment of like, holy smokes, the system's being used for a lot more than just cold storage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, just knowing some of the customers and some of their use cases from talking to them over the years, I mean, you have the streaming, you have the big streamers, you have others that are doing mobile required applications that has, distribution. You have SaaS providers, some of the biggest SaaS providers in the world that are on top of it, and not to mention things like Genomics. I remember, during COVID and everything like that, with all of the data that was coming in to go and find and process for these new genomics types of applications that then led to the mRNA stuff and things of that nature. It's just incredible the different use cases that it's kind of spawned off in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the early days obviously were very much around the SaaS case that you mentioned, right? And S3 as an origin for CDNs and for like CloudFront in particular. But then to see things like an interesting thing about the genomics space that you talk about is the genomics folks. It's a bunch of researchers in all sorts of domains. It's researchers in universities It's researchers in like healthcare companies and drug manufacturing, drug research, and so on. And they tend to, especially in the earlier days of genomics, collaborate through shared tooling and shared libraries, right? I remember early on the launch of the genomics folks called the GATK4, which was like, like the most popular, like large scale analytics sort of framework for genomics. And getting hooks into that for S3 suddenly created this thing where they had shared software that they could all build and work on top of, but also like shared infrastructure abstractions that they could work with. And I remember like talking to scientists who were so excited about the fact that these shared tooling and the opportunity to have scale and elasticity for storage and compute meant that it was a thing that they didn't have to like think about in terms of doing genomics research. And so like it's those stories that I think the team finds so rewarding, that by solving infrastructure problems, we can get a distracting thing out of the way, and like suddenly science can move faster. And it's amazing to see those examples. We see those examples, even today with some of the users on top of things like S3 vectors.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been so many launches over the last 20 years. I mean, the multi-part upload, S3 Lambda, event notifications delivering 300 billion plus events per day. Like we talked about, the strong consistency, CloudFront integration, again, that, which has been one of the big use cases all along. How do you see these and others, like as we go forward, really have fundamentally changed how developers build their cloud native applications? What do you see as some of the ones that have really been, key for you?
I think the stuff that we talked about around removing sharp edges has definitely been like so hard to appreciate in terms of its impact. So stuff like consistency, conditional operations, and a lot of the other like sort of like thankless internal changes that just mean that we scale more and get more consistent performance and things like that. Like I think that's probably, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of what the team does is like just core under the covers focus on improving and scaling the system. I think like to the directions that we're going next, and the way that we really see, more feature level things impacting our customers, I would say that there's two themes, Rob, right now that are really, really, I think capturing our imagination and really seem to be resonating with customers. The first one is around adding new data types, right? New primitives to S3. And so that's the launch of S3 tables and S3 vectors over the past few years. And so we can totally talk more about that and some of the experiences there. I'd say the other one that is like sort of overlapping with those two, but is really like interestingly picking up speed, is the role that S3 and those other data primitives play as an underpinning for building applications from a like agentic tooling, and I don't know what term you want to use, citizen developer, like opening up development to a broader audience and having the right building blocks to build on top of. I think is a space where we're really, really excited.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we stay there? Because I think to your point, I mean, you mentioned two of my favorite with the vectors and the table buckets. Well, I mean, to me, that really opened up yet, like we were talking about, it's like, it's more than just object storage. I mean, there are definitely others who built databases and or data lakes on top of S3, but the table buckets and Iceberg and looking and leaning into open standards, I mean, to me, that was great. And actually, I think it ties into what you were talking about with the agentic portion of it as well, because I don't think I think they go hand in glove with each other as well. What are you seeing as customers are pushing you into that next era, the AI era, as we go that way?
I think that I think one thing that I wish we could say we did it like super intentionally, but it was a thing that customers I think taught us, and it's a thing that I think the team really like internalizes as a central thing to how we think about S3, is that the original object APIs were incredibly accessible, right? Like they were they were a thing that you could build libraries around, and they left your data in a position that you could take data that was intended for one thing, and then you could go and build other things on top of that. And so, a like really, really common example was there were loads of customers that had log data being ingested from their SaaS applications. And they would do an ETL style sort of conversion on that log data. This is years ago, into Parquet. And they'd have sort of like a curated, set of Parquet files representing a table of logs or a table of click trail data or whatever inside of S3. And inside those customers, you'd see this like really remarkable thing happen over a few years, which is they would stand up teams that own their own internal services. For example, like Pinterest, who built loads of stuff on top of S3, would launch like new teams to do new things with the data that Pinterest shared across the organization. But they would take those Parquet tables, they would transform them into whatever they needed for that team, and they would run with it. And so the idea of having like a shared substrate for data and a shared API for it really meant that customers had a ton of freedom in terms of how they built on top of their data. And they were free to use whatever tool was most appropriate. And they just had a ton of velocity as a result of that. And that was a thing that I think we really like wanted to preserve as we moved into other things. And so as we started to look at tables, we were seeing a lot of customers building on top of OTFs like Apache Iceberg, right? And the idea was that the back end of your database, right, that structured storage as a complement to the unstructured object storage that you already had with S3, it had the same property of wanting to be able to use any engine or any tool on top of it, right? You want to be able to work with Athena on top of it. You might want to work with some partner or external engine. You might want to just go write code instead. And so we kind of like leaned into the tables thing as customers loved the idea that on top of S3, they could have a structured data primitive, but they didn't love the fact that building on top of Iceberg, they were having to do all of their own table maintenance, and they were having to operate it and reason about potentially durability impacting issues if they, had reference issues in their runtime for Iceberg. And so moving Iceberg a little bit up the stack and building a managed construct where they could just have a table API was something that really seemed to resonate with folks, and I think holds true to where we approach this stuff as S3. And that's what's taken us into vectors as a third data type. And so that's kind of the thinking behind those. The bit that's been like really, really interesting is as we see customers, and even as I and the team are doing a lot of building, right? Whether we're building like operational tools for ourselves or building log analysis tools or just doing like weekend projects, everybody is like I think really invigorated by the stuff they can get done with these emerging coding tools. You can build a pretty meaningful thing over the course of a Saturday afternoon. And the property of being able to work with data that you already have, or being able to like write data into S3 and then riff off of it with a different project the next weekend, or hand it to someone else on your team to work with, is just like a surprisingly awesome fit, right? The fact that like having these building block level primitives means that, it almost like individualizes what historically has been, something that you needed to go and find the right SaaS tool for. And that like, that's a thing that right now we're really excited about the speed of what folks are doing.
Yeah, and I think it's partially because of the flexibility of S3 and all the different things you can do with it. I mean, even there's the FSX and S3 integrations that are used in that ML, HPC type of scenario as well. When, people have large data sets and things of that nature, and they need some file system access to it and things of that nature. So it makes a lot of sense to me that it kind of becomes the underpinning for a lot of this. One thing we didn't touch on that, I feel like you have to touch on is the fact that, again, over the last 20 years, it's about 84% lower price on S3 than it was in 2006. And when you look at it, there's the price reductions and, over 6 billion saved by intelligent tiering alone. When you look out and look at the price curve and everything like that, especially with what's going on in the market and everything like that, it would seem that this sets you up for that kind of Amazon principle of always looking to lower prices and give more value at the same time. Is that something you're still pushing forward with?
Of course. That's been something that, like at the end of the day, from a storage perspective, like price is another form of friction for being able to build, right? If you are like concerned about that aspect of your system, right, you end up having to spend time, auditing and identifying data that you can like thin out or perform deletions on and things. And the way that certainly like a lot of our larger customers have always talked to us about this is to say that there's an opportunity cost to all of that work, and to like deletions all up, that there's in a lot of cases a future value on data that is hard to quantify. And we're certainly seeing right now that with a lot of customers that are heavy in AI adoption, for example, that customers who like found ways to save those like long-term data sets, whether they're logs or transaction records or, older artifacts from their business, they're finding that stuff is actually like a really meaningful source or an indexable source for training models or like building applications on top of. And so we pushed a lot over the years on things like introducing storage classes, introducing intelligent tiering. I think intelligent tiering is an example of something that we basically turned into a one-click product to be able to allow us to choose the storage class that best fits the behaviors of your data. And I think we've saved over $6 billion on behalf of customers by launching that feature. And so, it's something that we really treat as a feature of the system that we just have to keep pushing on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so, hey, this has been great. We've been talking about the last 20 years. Where do we go from here with S3?
I think the team is really, really excited about the velocity and the rate of launches and innovation over the past couple of years. I think that we're working closer to application builders than we ever have at this point. You mentioned, there are databases and other services that are built directly on top of S3, right? That often allow themselves to focus on a really differentiated performance API layer, but then back with S3 for all of their like durability and scale. I think that we will probably continue to like move closer to applications, which is going to drive us into higher performance domains. It's probably going to tie us into deeper integration with like computational tasks that you want to perform on your data. And it's definitely, absolutely going to bring us more tightly integrated with the kinds of development tools that are emerging today that are allowing a much broader population to build applications. And that's a place where I think we're really, really focused in terms of continuing to evolve the service.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that, Andy. I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you would say, you're always looking around the corner to see what's there and, make sure that there's no one-way doors either. So, but I love it. And thank you, Andy, for coming on. This has been great. I always love talking about this stuff and where it's going.
Show up with you too. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Yep. And thank you for watching this very special AWS Pi Day celebration on theCUBE, this CUBE conversation. Stay tuned for some further analysis here on theCUBE, the leader in analysis and news.